what if I steal your brain and I put it in my body and we have a Freaky Friday situation going on here?
The chain's not that helpful because then it makes it seem like that they're both the same chain, like all the chains are connected. But they're two different people. I'm putting my foot down.
Teenagers weren't even like a concept until the 50s, really. But I think when those sorts of groups are created, it creates this whole new thing you can identify with and can characterize you and how you act and how you think of yourself.
Welcome back to Coming In Without Context. My name is Erin Lowe, and I'm thrilled to be the host of today's episode. I'm here with Hope, and we will start by talking about a fascinating topic while Dylan is banished. And then after a few minutes, Dylan will rejoin us, come in without context, if you will, and we will bamboozle him with our conversation. How are you doing, Hope?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing all right. This is very exciting and nerve-wracking.
So what's your topic?
Well, basically, I get a little bit too excited about metaphysics, which has nothing to do with my career or life for the most part, but it's the part of my degree that I found really fascinating just because I think it's an important part of why we're here, understanding our reality. And so I want to take us down the road of personal identity today. And I don't want to go too far down the technical parts of it because I just want to have this conversation. And that being said, if anyone who listens to this is familiar with this topic, they'll probably wonder why we're not talking about some of the technical components like Leibniz's law and the principle of the indiscernibility of identicals, but we're not even going to touch on that. So I just want to start. My question for you is, what do you think constitutes personal identity?
Well, I feel like the things that are discussed a lot, at least in classes I'm in, are things like, I even had to fill out like a chart in one of my classes at one point in college, is like race, ethnicity, sexuality, religion, nationality, family structure was included on that one. Language, I think, was included on that. Gender is definitely included.
Mm-hmm.
Just any sort of like group of people that you can feel like you're a part of, and like mangling all those groups together. I don't know if mangling was the right word. Mixing all those groups together to constitute like who you are and who you identify as.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. And there's so many ways to look at this question too, because I mean, there's the question of personal identity in a metaphysical sense, but also in a social sense. And when, I mean, we're talking about any of these questions, most people maintain intersectional identities, right? So
yeah,
that's part of the problem we see with a lot of research when, I mean, it comes to any sort of social issue, but that researchers have a really hard time identifying like what the constant is when it comes to a person's identity, because usually they exist at this intersection of multiple identities. And how do you define that? How do you understand that? Mm-hmm. So I guess there are a couple of ways we could go about talking about this. And I think that the social component is really important. And I think we could talk about social issues in the context of identity, or we could take a step back and think about like what it even means to have an identity that persists over time, like in a metaphysical sense.
Okay.
Maybe we start with the metaphysical, because I do think that that in a way underlies a lot of our social identities. And I mean, there are a lot of different areas of metaphysics, right? And some of them investigate things like what is real, and some of them investigate things like what can we know. I guess that's epistemology, but some of them are talking about like the metaphysics of race, the metaphysics of gender. Are they real? And if they're real, in what sense are they real? That kind of thing. But also, if we're thinking of just, you know, what is a person, how do we know that we are us, right? How do you know that you are you, the same you that you were 10 minutes ago?
I mean, I don't know if I'm the same as I was 10 minutes ago. Isn't that like, I guess, because like your cells change, right? Isn't that part of it? Like you're constantly losing and regaining things physically.
Yeah. So your cells are constantly dying and regenerating. Obviously, not all of them at once.
No. But I'm not an exact carbon copy of who I was 10 minutes ago, probably. Like some skin cell fell off and blew off into the air and is now making dust in my room.
Right. So do you think that you are the same person you were 10 minutes ago?
Yes.
Why do you think that?
Um, just because even though like I know like skin cells probably fell off or whatever, like I don't think I underwent any drastic enough change to like change my viewpoint or my stances on anything really, or like how I act, how I talk. For the most part, the components that I identify with are still the same as they were 10 minutes ago.
Okay. So do you think if I took half of your cells and I changed them right now, you would still be you?
I think as long as I still act and think in the same way as I did, and like I didn't imagine myself changed at all, really. Especially if I wasn't like aware of it. I guess no, you can change without being aware of it. But like I don't think that would necessarily change who I am because I don't think that things changing physically with you change necessarily who you are. I think they definitely have the possibility to, like just thinking about like disabilities. Like if someone suddenly like went to war and lost their arm, I don't think they would it doesn't necessarily change who they are, but I think it definitely has the potential to. But I don't think the physical components of a person makes who they are and what they identify as. But I do think with when it comes to disabilities, a lot of people can identify with those, even if they weren't born with them. So I think it definitely has the potential to, but it
Right.
doesn't necessarily change who they are.
So the physical could impact the psychological.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if it's not our material body then that is what constitutes identity, it seems like you're going down well, I'm not sure which road you're going down because there are a couple of forks you could take. But it seems like to you the psychological component is more important when it comes to what makes identity, and then the physical components play a role. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's where I'd go. I always have this problem in philosophy discussions with philosophers is that they've already thought about this way more deeply than I have. And so then I always am told, especially when I have these conversations with Dylan, he's like, so now you have two options. I'm like, okay, great. Okay, thank you for telling me what my options are.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
No, you have infinite options, please. It's just that we're trained like Socratic style. So we're pushed down a particular road and then forced to engage with it.
No, I completely understand. It's just that I'm kind of like, a lot of times I'm thinking on the fly for these and like speaking out my ideas as I'm thinking them, and then I haven't thought about them to the same degree. But
No,
anyways, continue.
that's okay. That's exactly the point, right? That's why this is fun. So, okay, but the reason I'm pushing you down a particular road is because I have an idea I want to hear your thoughts on.
Mhm.
So, but first, I want to ask you, so when you're thinking about psychology as this, fundamental part of identity, what is it about psychology that makes the difference? Right? Like, what is it about our psychology that makes us distinct?
Well, I feel like it's no one else is in your thoughts but you. And I feel like how we think impacts basically like almost every aspect of us, because like our internal monologue and just our brain kind of chooses all of our actions. It's how we decide what we do when we do it. It's how we convey our ideas. It's what creates our ideas. And it kind of constitutes how we view the world. Like, even if your eyeballs are the ones seeing things, that goes to your brain to be interpreted.
Hmm. Okay, so what is it then that makes you, as a, how old, you're 22?
Yeah.
As a 22-year-old human, the same human that you were when you were 6 years old, and the same human that you're going to be when you're 50 years old?
Also, I'm realizing I'm only 21, but maybe this episode will air when I'm 22, so who knows?
Okay. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I forgot my own age.
I've
So,
aged you in the course of this conversation.
okay. Can you repeat the question though? Because I got distracted by
No.
me realizing I'm not 22 years old.
You're so good. Hey, philosophy tends to make people have existential crises all the time. So there you go. No, my question was, so how do you know that you, as a 21-year-old human, as we've now established you are,
Yes.
how do you know that you are the same thing that you were when you were 6 years old and the same thing that you will be when you're 50 years old?
Okay, so I would say I'm not the same as I was when I was 6 years old.
Okay.
And I probably won't be the same when I'm 50 years old. And I think that does partially have to do with like the brain and psychology, just in that like how we are able to process things and think about things is so drastically different when we're like 6 years old versus now at 21, that I can't say I'm the same as I was then, because I'm distinctly not. Just like I don't act like I'm 6 years old. I don't think like I'm 6 years old. And so who I was then is not who I am now. And I think that's why I would say like people definitely, their identities can change. And I think a really distinct part of this is that right now I'm able to identify as a young adult. And with that comes a lot of, I don't know, things that I'm able to identify with about this age group. And I know the idea of there being distinct age groups, especially like teenagers or young adults, is relatively newer. Because like it wasn't, teenagers weren't even like a concept until the 50s, really. But I think when those sorts of groups are created, it creates this whole new thing you can identify with and can characterize you. And how you act and how you think of yourself. And I think like I've gone through puberty, so I feel like I'm in that way I've definitely changed since I was 6. But I've also like gone through so many formative experiences that I literally can't identify with my 6-year-old self as I would have when I was 6.
Right.
If that makes sense.
And so one of the things that you said there was that you think that you are distinct from your 6-year-old self, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so along those same lines, are you then distinct from your 50-year-old self?
I would say I probably will be, but obviously I don't know.
Okay,
Can't read the future.
fair enough. So if that's the case, then if you are distinct from that version of you, it's not you, or how do you know that it is you? Is it still you?
I think it was me, but I don't think it is current me.
Okay. I like that. I'm here for that.
I don't know, like it's the same sort of thing as like if a rock is weathered down, it's not the same rock,
Mhm.
but it is the same rock.
Right. Okay, but so if you are a distinct thing from the you that will exist in 30 years, then why do your decisions now matter for you?
Why do they matter?
Because if you will be a distinct thing, like if that self is not you, why should you care?
I guess because it's what I will be, even if I change, it's who I will be in the future.
Mhm.
And so I have to make the changes to transform that future me into a me that I would want for myself.
So do you
But
think there's something that connects you with that version of you?
yes.
What is it?
I guess it would probably be, for the most part, physical, as in, like, you can't, even if I believe, like, what constitutes a person is primarily psychological, that is encased by a body that will always be attached to that brain. And even if things change about, like, my body, or like, it can't be transmitted to something else.
What if I steal your brain and I put it in my body and we
Well,
have a Freaky Friday situation going on here?
I mean, I would say that in reality that wouldn't work.
Okay, but let's suppose it works.
Um, okay. I think if that were the case, give me a second to think about this.
I guess I'm really just curious about which one of us is you in that scenario.
So in that scenario, I would say if my brain is put into your body, then I would be the brain in your body, not the body with your brain. But that doesn't mean other people are going to view me that way.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, from my point of view, that's what I would say is me.
Okay.
Because
so
I think it's
even
more to
though-
do with your thoughts than
Your
it has to
thoughts?
do with your exterior body.
So why do you think you would have different thoughts? Or sorry, why do you think you would have the same thoughts if you were in my body?
I think at first I probably would have thoughts I wouldn't had before, like, what the fuck is going on? So I do think there would be new thoughts. However, I think my way of thinking would likely stay the same. That being said, I don't know how physiologically that would work. Like, if somehow, like, the neurotransmitters in your body somehow were, like, really different from how they worked in mine, and suddenly information came to my brain in a different way. Like, I don't know how physically that would work, but from what I understand, I think I would still think the same if it was my brain put there.
Okay. So wait, Dylan, are you back with us?
Yeah, I'm back.
Welcome back. So you hopped in on the brain transplant moment, yes?
Yeah. I was about to comment, Hope, on your thing until you mentioned the brain thing at the very end. And then I was like, yep, that's right.
Okay. Well, in that case, I have a question for both of you. Okay. So let me paint you a picture. This thought experiment was proposed by Derek Parfit in order to illustrate his view on personal identity. And basically, it starts with the idea that there is a trans teleporter that will take you to Mars. Have either of you heard this before?
No.
No.
Excellent. Okay. So there's a there's a teletransporter that will take you to Mars. I have apparently reinvented it in my own mind. But in this society, it's commonplace to use it, and it works by scanning your body when you get into it, destroying your body, and then recreating it exactly in the place you want to go.
Okay, I've heard of this from Star Trek. It's from Star Trek.
Well, but the thought experiment, specifically in relation to the thing that we're talking about, that I can't tell you what the topic is, was from Parfit.
Okay.
Okay, not only will it take account of every physical detail of your body, but you retain your memories, knowledge of your experiences, all of it. So my first question for both of you is, would you use the teletransporter?
Yes.
I mean, where would it send me? Like, could I go, like, anywhere? And how much does it cost?
It's free. You can just get in it now.
I'm all in.
Yes, okay.
I'd probably do it.
Yeah? Okay, so first I want to ask, why would you be comfortable using it?
Because I don't care about my existence as a being. Wait, hold on.
Oh, okay.
Wait, hold on. I don't put stock in the quarks or smaller units that make up my current body.
Mhm.
And so I have no issues with my identity slash being recreated somewhere else.
Okay. What about you, Hope?
Yeah, I would say, as I said earlier, I don't think I, as a person, is from my body itself. It's more my thoughts and actions that constitute who I am. So as long as I'm able to retain like the same sort of memories and things that would influence the way I act, I would be willing to do it.
Okay. So I'm glad you said that because I think a lot of us have that inclination to say that not only is it something psychological that is what connects us to that second self, right? Whatever it is that is recreated somewhere else, but it is specifically memory that connects us. Because we have memory of all of our experiences in the past. So I have some questions about that. Because I wonder, so Hope, if it's the memory that's important, if it's the psychology that's important, when it comes to your identity, if say that is what we've found that is the connector between you and the 6-year-old version of yourself, and the connector between the 21-year-old version of you and the 50-year-old version of you, then what happens when you get amnesia?
I think that's really tough because, give me a second, I'm thinking this through. I do think that if you have amnesia, I mean, obviously there's different types. It does somewhat change who you are in that, I mean, like sometimes people with like dementia or Alzheimer's are like transported back in time and believe they are themselves from a younger time in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having that viewpoint kind of changes them from who they were when they could fully remember everything. But it doesn't necessarily change how they're viewed by everyone around them. So then that's where I think a lot of conflict comes in those familial relationships, because suddenly they view themselves and identify themselves as someone else from who they're being viewed as by everyone around them. And that's where I think they get sort of lost in time. And I mean, those sorts of things can also change the emotions of the person. Like they can have more mood swings and things in a way that they never had before that sort of affected them. So I don't want to be like, dementia or amnesia makes someone not who they are, but I do think it has the tendency to. It can change people in a lot of ways. I don't know, Dylan, do you have thoughts?
I would, like, before even answering that question, I would push back on the memory thing because I don't know if I personally believe that memory is even sufficient to constitute a second self. Because our memories
Excellent.
are constantly changing and rewriting themselves. And so if we did go by memory constituting a version of a self, then you would not, there would be infinite versions of yourself constantly changing. And that doesn't seem to align with iterations of this conversation. But if I did have to accept that memory was a necessary feature, I would just bite the bullet, as I do. I would just bite the bullet and say that patients with dementia or Alzheimer's or amnesia are not themselves anymore.
Well, so I want to ask you then, because you don't have to accept that. I want to give you the opportunity to suggest different criteria that could constitute identity in this way.
Okay, see, that's where I have no answer for you. Okay, I can begin to theory craft. So I've taken metaphysics and I enjoyed it, but what I took away mainly overall is that there's no correct answers. or at the very least, we don't have all the pertinent information in order to say or theorize what the correct answer might be yet. But something I did write about was, as I mentioned, the smallest particles, quarks, or perhaps they're smaller particles.
Mm-hmm.
I made an argument that whatever the smallest particles are, their formation and structure constitute the self. And I don't remember the exact details of my argument, but essentially I was saying that even if there are smaller things than quarks, smaller units, whatever the endpoint is, there is an endpoint. I made that point. Whatever the endpoint is, that is the foundation of everything, and that's what defines the self. Even if those parts are changing, oh God, no, I need to I'm walking into the ship of Theseus.
Yeah.
I need to reread my paper.
No, that's okay. So I wonder, are you saying that whatever the smallest thing is, that is the self, or that the self is made of all those smaller things, so that is the self?
It's not just the smallest things, it's the smallest things in the particular structure and organization that they exist in.
Right.
So is the self always changing then?
Yeah, that was what I was thinking too.
Yeah, I think that any discussions about the self can immediately jump to theoretical discussion in the form of, like, Aaron, you know the theory that's like you have like the chain of self. I guess you would call it time slices, right? You and your time slice form.
That was almost my topic today.
There's a theory that, like, the self is actually just a series of infinite points, or not infinite, like the points in your life is each a link in a chain, and that the chain is the self, right?
Or
so
a fourth dimensional time worm.
Yeah, even if you are changing, as long as because each chain link is part of the whole chain is you, so you're still part of you, essentially.
Yeah, so basically you are not your temporal parts, but like every instant of you is a time slice of you, right? So that is a temporal part that creates the fourth dimensional space-time worm that is you, because you're extended through space and time.
So anyway, I'm not subscribing to any one of those theories, but I feel that discussions of the self necessarily will always lead to such theories that are more metaphysically theoretical rather than what we try to measure in our physical and or mental dimensions.
Yeah, and I also feel like that conversation too somehow always turns into, okay, so there is one thing, but there are also infinitely many things.
Yeah. Yes, correct.
Yeah. Okay. So I think all of that's fair to say. And there's a lot of debate in this area, but I'm glad, Hope, that you are adhering to the memory version of this. And it seems like, Dylan, you're adhering to a sort of materialism. And I like that we're going down both of those roads, because I'm going to take us a step further. And oftentimes when this thought experiment is brought up, people will respond by saying something like, oh, I think memory is what connects us, or I think it's psychological continuity. So if my experience is continuous with this later stage of self, like that's what connects me, that kind of thing. And a lot of people get stumped when it comes to the teletransporter because they have this inclination not to get in because they don't want the original self, or the self that has causal primacy, to be destroyed, because they have some sort of problem with that idea. And I think if your instinct was not to get into the machine, then there's nothing to stop you from getting in if memory is all that matters. So I'm glad that your view are also consistent with that. But if there is something wrong with destroying that first body, then it might not really be memory or even psychological continuity necessarily that is the connection. And so do you think that there is a physical component that matters when it comes to this kind of continuity over time?
I located my paper. and actually my paper does work to answer your question, because
Excellent.
I argued for universal monism,
Yeah.
in that there only one object exists, and that one object is the universe. So neither you, I, or Hope exist, only the universe and cosmos exist. So to answer your question, I have no issue with being teleported or recreated, because in fact myself doesn't exist, only the universe exists, and parts within the universe moving around is still the one object, the universe.
Okay, but you still experience your life as this part, right?
Yes, that's I acknowledge that my paper does not answer the self question.
Fair enough. And I do appreciate that you brought that up, because I think that is like a fair way to look at the universe. It's just then we're still stuck with questions of like this, because our experience seems to be, if not distinct from one universal thing, then at least it is kind of like we were talking about earlier. Our viewpoint is unique as a part of the whole, if that is what the universe is. So, okay, I'm going to take it a step further. Let's say we have a fission case. So say you've gotten into the teletransporter, you feel good about it, you're feeling great, you worked to get over your fear of getting in it if you had it initially, and you start using it all the time as your regular means of transportation. Say goodbye to carbon dioxide emissions, because you don't need to drive anymore. I don't know what's creating these machines. It might be worse for the environment. Who knows? Anyway, it's all great until it's not great. So one day you get into the machine as usual, but instead of waking up on Mars, you remain conscious and you're confused until the attendant tells you that this new version of the scanner doesn't need to destroy your body in order to recreate it. And so then they give you the intercom so that you can talk to the other you, the one that did make it to Mars. So now my question is, which one is you? Hope, do you have an idea?
Well, in that moment, okay, so I am the one who stayed behind, right? Like,
Are
Well,
you?
I can't tell you
Are
that.
you?
no, but okay, so mentally, like the brain, like I'm hearing from the person saying, "Oh, you can talk on an intercom with the other one," right?
I don't know. Are you?
That's the scenario, isn't it?
Something is, but is it you?
Okay. So here's the thing. If mentally, like, I am viewing the guy saying, "Oh, you want to talk on the intercom," to the other version of you, then I would be the one viewing the guy and him saying that.
You mean yourself?
Because, huh?
You mean yourself?
Yes, myself would be that. Because I said earlier that who myself is changes with how I think and how I act, and just like different viewpoints. I think in the moment I could be both, but as I change, going through different life experiences, meeting new people, changing the way I think, changing the way I act, I would eventually become whichever one that I'm physically in. Because as I said before, even though I don't believe the body constitutes the self, what I do think constitutes the self is encased within a specific body. And so like whatever body I'm in that's encasing myself is the one I would be. Because I'm not having split vision, viewing from both the one that went through the process and the one that didn't. So whichever one I'm experiencing is the one that I would probably be in the future.
Okay. So let's say you were not the one that stayed behind. Let's say you get in the machine and then you wake up on Mars and then someone hands you an intercom and you're talking to the body that was the first body, right? Well, not just the body, the person that was the first person that got into the machine, who was you, are they no longer you?
I would say yeah. I think because I feel like if that happened to me, that would be a very formative experience that would impact how I viewed things if I were on either end, that I would be whatever end I was on. I don't think I would stay the same as the other one.
I agree with an iteration of what you said, except I disagree with the self being encased in a body, because, and it's for the reason you commented this right after you said that. You said that I'm not having split vision, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that it's not about whatever's encased inside the body. It's about what you're experiencing, what your consciousness is experiencing, whatever the consciousness might be, right? So my answer is that, like, I agree with Hope. The moment that you gain that the two versions of myself gain consciousness, they become separate people. They become their own individuals because they are experiencing new occurrences that are different from each other. So if we go back to like the visualization of a chain, they used to be, or there was one chain, and suddenly that chain has now split off into two separate chains. And so those two separate chains are different people. The chain's not that helpful because then it makes it seem like that they're both the same chain, like all the chains are connected. But they're two different people. I'm putting my foot down.
You sound like David Lewis, except that in his version, the chain or the space-time worm starts as a distinct space-time worm. So you would have essentially like parallel worms until the point of fission, which is interesting. And I don't know how I feel.
Yeah, how does that work? I don't understand that.
Well, it allows for the possibility of time travel.
Okay, but see, here's the issue. If there's parallel chains, is the assumption that only one chain exists in the material world until the point of fission?
I think that, okay, and I am not an expert in this, but I think that his assumption is that the two chains exist independently. Although I have a lot of problems with that idea.
Yeah, I don't know how that works.
Because they couldn't both time travel back to the same
chain.
Well, right. No, so that's why they're distinct. But the one of the problems with that is that then you have to, again, figure out what makes something distinct. And that means that, I mean, you could make that kind of claim for any moment in time, I feel like, as being distinct, but that's a whole different road. I think what you said makes a lot of sense. And I like your like split end as a way to conceive of it. So I guess the last part of this thought experiment that I want to ask you guys about is, let's say that the body that is scanned undergoes cardiac damage, and in just a few days it will die. So not just the body, the person, I should say. Does that matter?
What do you mean?
Does it matter?
Well, okay, so think about it like this. And I'm not expressing my view on this because I guess I mean, I'm inclined to say that it does matter, but I want to hear your thoughts. Because if in the first case, when you went through the machine, that first person that was you died instantly, and you were only the second person that continued to exist and experience the world, then why would it matter if that death is only delayed by a few days or a few hours?
I'm gonna answer that by sidestepping the main question that you're trying to get us this answer. I'm gonna say it only matters as much as any individual's death matters. And if it matters more to you yourself, it's only because you feel you have some relationship to the other version of yourself.
Okay, Hope, what do you think?
So am I the one that continued on?
Oh my gosh.
I know I can't ask like am I that one, but like so the thing is like it would matter if I died.
Yeah.
Like if my consciousness and who I am is not in the one that like transported but in the one that stayed, then I would say it mattered because I died. But if I was on the other end, I would agree that it only matters as much as like any person's death that I would know about matters. Like,
Okay. I think that's fair. Okay, so I know that we've been talking for a while, so I will wrap us up then. But I guess just Hope, do you have any takeaways from this conversation? And I know that I think the logical next step is, now that we've considered some of the metaphysics of this topic, then to move into the social components and like how we exist in that nexus of interpersonal relationships. But do you have any takeaways or concluding thoughts?
when Dylan first took metaphysics, I was subjected to a lot of conversations about metaphysics. And I've always said I hated metaphysics because of that. But this conversation wasn't that bad. So
What
that's what I
the?
have to say.
You trying to say something?
I'm trying to say I didn't really care if like about the debate if you hold something in your hand, is it two things or one thing, and like all of that really just kind of bothered me.
So if you hold a person in your hand, Hope, is it two things?
Or infinite things.
Or is it one thing or infinitely many things?
Yeah, I hated that aspect of metaphysics. And I feel like that's what you'd always talk about, and I'd just be like, oh god, I cannot deal with this any longer. But it did mean that in my senior seminar, when my professor tried to bring up the ship of Theseus but didn't remember what it was called, I was the one who was able to say what it was called. So
There you go. We did learn something from metaphysics. Okay, so both of you, would you still get in the teleportation machine?
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah? Okay, and Dylan, what do you think our topic is for this conversation?
I think starting from the general to more specific, it is about what is the self, then it's who am I, and then it is Derek Parfit's thought experiments.
Yeah, that's pretty good. The overall question was, what do you think constitutes personal identity? And it seems like we did not find an answer. And that is the best way to have this conversation. So
Yay! All right, do the closer.
what's the closer?
I forgot to prep you for the closer.
Can you tell me what to say?
Just give a good goodbye and thanks for listening. And
Okay. Thanks for joining us today and for listening to this exhilarating conversation. I hope it made you question who you are and what you are and if you are. And with that, have a wonderful rest of your day. Wait, Hope, do I just say an introduction?
Yeah. Whatever you want it to be. I don't always do it even, I don't think. I think I forget sometimes.
I'm psyching myself out.
It's really not that serious.
Okay.
Trust me. I think like we have an average of like 2 listeners per podcast episode. So